Hello, everyone. It's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another Top 5 Kaladesh countdown. I'm joined once again by Chaz. How you doing, Chaz?
I'm doing well. Super excited for today.
And you're probably wondering why Chaz is so excited.
Super excited.
Today is Green Card Day, and if you know Chaz, Chaz loves him some green cards, so
I do.
this is Chaz's time to shine with our countdown. So I guess we'll jump right into it, Chaz, with an uncommon of all things. Number 5 on our list, Blossoming Defense.
Yeah, so we literally made a last minute audible here, and I guess this is my honorable mention, right? We were going to talk about Architect of the Untamed, but I think Blossoming Defense is such a... We need to talk about this card. How it needs to be on this list. It's such a great card to talk about, whether it's in Standard. I definitely think it's going to see play in Modern when we talk about Infect. It's just such a great return for 1 mana, and Ranger's Guile was played back in Standard, if you remember the mono green devotion list, and I think we're there. I mean, green, maybe a splash of red, that kind of aggressive shell is already looking to be quite formidable, and Blossoming Defense is just a huge boon to that archetype.
Yeah, being 1 mana, save your creature from a removal spell, and 1 mana, make sure your creature wins in combat, potentially kills one of your opponent's creatures after blockers. That's a pretty powerful effect, and it is a strict upgrade on Ranger's Guile, which was only +1/+1. So I think this card is very good too, and can definitely find its way into some aggressive Standard lists, or in decks that really want to abuse the hexproof. If you got one creature that your plan really revolves around keeping alive, this is the best way to do it. We don't get a lot of playable cards that say hexproof anymore. They printed Invisible Stalker and Geist of St. Traft, and it kind of scared Wizards away from aggressive cards that say hexproof. So this is actually a pretty pushed hexproof card based on modern standards. Alright, moving on to our number 4 green card. We have Ovaya Pishiri Sage Lifecrafter.
All right, we did it. I think that's as close as we could get it. That awesome.
Yeah, I will accept that pronunciation. It is also a made-up word, so give me a break if I said it wrong. When I mess up common English words, I understand the criticism. But Ovaya Pishiri, what is that?
You get no criticism from me. It's all love. It's all love. But no, Ovaya looks very similar to a card we've seen in the past, right, Seth? So this is more of like a retake on Rise the Redeemed. Now, I know in Commander outlets having that split color is great because you get to add another color, but I'm actually interested in Ovaya as a nice 1-drop. It's not hugely aggressive, but it's something to think about when it comes to deck building. Maybe throwing it as a one-of to kind of round out a middle to late game strategy when you're kind of burning out on resources. This is a great way to extract some value out of a 1-drop.
Yeah, we've seen cards like Dragon Master Outcast see play, and while Dragon Master Outcast has the advantage of getting dragons for free in the late game, this can actually build an entire board state, an entire army all by itself. Yes, it does cost mana, but it is a 1-drop that gets potentially extremely powerful once you have a lot of mana in the late game, and green is a color that can easily make a lot of mana, so I think this card is very good. It's nice that it's a 1/2 on turn 1, so you get that extra toughness, which can be relevant in a world of servo tokens and things like that. And then in the late game, this can potentially just take over the board.
Yeah, Avaya's really all upside here for a 1-drop. Again, not hugely aggressive, but I mean, I think everything about this card is great. The art is great. The kind of the lore surrounding this card is fantastic. And like you said, green's already making a healthy amount of mana, so later on in the game when you're kind of taxed or you're not really drawing into anything, you can always rely on Ovaya to keep you, at least your ground game, kind of stable.
And another upside to this card, which I missed on my first reading, is that the second ability, pay 5, you get an XX, that's the number of creatures you control.
Yes.
So that's not just counting tokens, which is sort of how Raise the Redeemed was. This is counting any creature. So you play this as a 1-drop, play your 2-drop, your 3-drop, your 4-drop, and then you tap this on turn 5. Maybe you played out your hand. You're going to end up with like a 5/5 for 5, and then it spirals from there. So I like that it's creatures and not just the tokens, which is how I initially read the card at a quick glance.
Yeah.
Moving on to number 3 on our green Kaladesh list, we have more energy. We talk about a lot of energy cards.
Yeah, we do.
Bristling Hydra. So, Chaz, you're the green mage. What do you think of this one?
Ah, I love this. This is such a great card at this converted mana cost. I love. We talked about the Lathnu Hellion. Again, this is a really self-contained card. At the very least, it provides you with the energy to use its own ability. You can use the ability whenever you want. So you can save this from removal immediately. And it's for the converted mana cost, this is on curve, and with the ability, it's way ahead of the curve.
Yeah, and we've been talking about a lot of energy cards for a potential green-red energy deck in the curve, and it seems pretty easy to produce energy, so it's realistic that you could protect this from multiple removal spells across the course of a couple turns by producing energy in other places. And of course, you can play this, not use the protection ability, and use it to pump up your 2-drop, or use it to keep your Helion alive and things like that. So I think that we talked about this a bunch of times. The question about energy was, would there be enough support from just one set to make a deck? And after seeing all of Kaladesh, I'm pretty confident the answer is yes. There is way more energy cards than I expected, and a lot of them seem pretty powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if you're not solely relying on energy, like I said, this provides its own energy. And I think that's kind of where we look at these cards in terms of just being viable on their own. And then we look at the energy resources. So if you're not using energy as a kind of a gimmick, or really focusing on energy in your deck building process, the Hydra gives you its own energy to use for its ability.
All right, number 2 on our list. It's Gear Hulk time, like every other
Gear Hulk
color.
time. Yep.
Verdurous Gear Hulk. So, Chaz, what do you think of this Gear Hulk?
So, farewell to one of my old friends and old favorite cards of Magic, Avatar of Might. This just seems way better than Avatar of Might could ever be. A 5 mana, it can either be an 8/8 straight up trample, which is, I think, a long-standing argument that a lot of the Magic community, especially LSV, has posed. Like, where does it stop? Like, how big does a creature need to be at a vanilla to say you're getting the most out of the mana cost? I think 5 mana for an 8/8 trample is pretty good. It's way ahead of the curve, and I think its ability is just over the top. Like, you can either go in a wide strategy, you can make this extremely large, you can distribute the counters any way you want to. You can make this a 5/5 trample, and your Sylvan Advocate now a huge threat. You can do so many different things with this ability, and having trample is just like insane.
Yeah, it is a very powerful card, and in some ways, it's the opposite of Combustible Gear Hulk. It gives you a ton of flexibility. Like
Yes.
you said, you get to choose if you need to get in some damage, you can dump all your counters on your Sylvan Advocate and have this huge Vigilant Sylvan Advocate. If the board is clear, your opponent maybe is playing a red deck without hard removal, you can just make this a 8/8 trample, and what's your opponent going to do about it? So you get a ton of options, and you can use this card to give your opponent bad blocks. If your opponent has 2 Sylvan Advocates, you have 2. You can put a counter on each of your Sylvan Advocates, plus get a 6/6 trample, and start winning in combat with your Sylvan Advocates. So there's just a ton of flexibility, a ton of ways you can break up those counters, and I think that makes this a really powerful card in any deck that is playing a bunch of creatures. So last but not least, we are heading to our second Planeswalker I think we've talked about, and a unique Planeswalker, because Nissa Vital Force ultimates incredibly quickly. What do you think about Nissa, Jazz?
So, we talked about Chandra, but I think Nissa is by far my choice, the best Planeswalker in this set. I mean, we've seen a 5 mana Nissa before. It had really great success in Standard and World Breaker, and I think this is honestly better than that. I know you got to untap 4 lands, but hear me out. I mean, like you said, you can immediately threaten an ultimate. You procure a 5/5 out of your lands to kind of stay back and block, or just have a huge threat that your opponent has to deal with. It could deal with planeswalkers. It's probably going to be larger than most of the creatures on your opponent's side of the field. And the thing with Nissa Vital Force, it can recycle additional copies of itself. So subsequent copies of Nissa Vital Force are actually a bonus rather than just sticking around in your hand, because you can exhaust the first copy of this card. You get to play another copy of this card and get the other card back. So it's almost like we're getting into a season's pass loop here with all these Nissa Vital Forces, and their emblems do stack. So if you happen to just jam out a few of these emblems, you're going to keep yourself in the game and eventually just bury yourself or bury your opponent in card advantage, whether it be just the one emblem or multiple emblems or what have you.
And remember, too, you compared this to Nissa Worldwaker, and Nissa Worldwaker actually didn't protect herself as a 5-drop because the land didn't untap. So being able to actually untap a tap land makes this Nissa potentially a lot more powerful than Nissa Worldwaker, because it's much easier to protect it on turn 5, when with Nissa Worldwaker you kind of had to wait till turn 6 if you wanted to have that land as a blocker. I can see this being played in an aggressive green deck. The plus ability very much reminds me of Kath of the Hammer, the green version, kind of the same ability. You turn a land into this big hasty beater, so I could see it being good there. Plus you get the upside of it playing defense as well. And even though the ultimate might not read that powerful, in any sort of mid-range or control game, being able to draw an extra card essentially every turn is likely going to win you the game over the course of a bunch of turns. It's not one of those ultimates where it's just like, oh, you do this and win, like Jace the Mind Sculptor, or even the new Chandra, for example, is pretty much you win the game within a turn, probably. Nissa, it's going to take a while, but that incremental advantage is likely going to win you a very large percentage of games where you ultimate.
Yeah, I think you said it best. And it really is such. We talked about flexibility in the Verter's Gearhulk. You like it in kind of as a curve topper too, and an aggressive list, and it can certainly do that. I'm looking at more of like the mid-range, even control lists that are leaning on maybe the -3 to keep cards in your hand and keeping yourself in the game in terms of card advantage. Nissa can really just play well with so many different in so many different archetypes and with so many different cards. I mean, this just seems great in a already pre-existing shell of like Temur Emerge, where you can basically play a turn 4 Elder Deep Fiend and curve out into Nissa Vital Force, and at that point you're swinging with a 5/6 and a 5/5, or just keeping yourself in the game with card advantage. That just seems amazing to me.
Yeah, I think that Nissa is sneakily powerful. She hasn't gotten nearly as much hype as Chandra, and personally, I still think Chandra is the more powerful of the two, but Nissa, in my opinion, is not far behind and is a very good card in her own right.
Yeah, I have a huge bias, but that's okay.
So that's been our top 5 green cards from Kaladesh. So let us know in the comments where you agree, where you disagree, what did we leave out. Anyway, we'll be back tomorrow to talk about some more Kaladesh cards with another top 5. Chaz, thanks for hanging out. I'll talk to you tomorrow.
Thank you, Seth. Yep, we'll see you all tomorrow. Super excited.